Hey, good evening, everybody. Welcome back to Bookish, and thanks for starting your weekend with us, the virtual program on authors, thinkers, and the literary life. I'm Sam Dunn. I'm the senior editor for premium content here at the Southern California News Group. Our sponsor tonight is the Segerstrom Center for the Arts, and here's a message from them to get us going.
Members, Segerstrom Center for the Arts is presenting a fascinating new speaker series called In Conversation, featuring some of your favorite authors. Amy Tan, author of The Joy Luck Club and The Kitchen God's Wife, opens the series on January 23rd. The brilliant cultural commentator Fran Lebowitz brings her wit and wisdom on February 6th. And Eric Larson, author of The Splendid and the Vile, as well as The Devil in the White City, arrives on March 6th. Join us for fascinating discussions and an inside look into the creative minds of these best-selling authors. 3 event packages start at only $60. Visit scfta.org today to purchase your tickets.
Great. Thanks again to the Segerstrom Center for the Arts. And, speaking of thanks, I want to say thanks to you, Reader Rewards subscribers, for supporting our programs and for everybody who attends. And if you are a Reader Rewards member attending tonight, you're automatically entered to win a $50 gift certificate to our partner, Once Upon a Time Bookstore in Montrose. And if you're not a subscriber yet, well, why aren't you a subscriber yet? Please go to scng.com/subscribe to find your local paper. And that way you're going to know about all the things we've got going on. Also, if you've missed past programs, go to scng.com/virtual programs and check them out too. Before we get started, let me remind you that if you're here, audience members are muted, but if you have questions, and we really hope you do, please use the Q&A feature on your Zoom toolbar. And if you want to just add a comment, use the chat feature also found on your screen. Our SCNG books editor, Eric Peterson, is going to be behind the scenes, and he's going to be manning the chat and answering questions. Just so you know, a link of the program will be sent to you after the fact, so you can share or just revisit some of your favorite moments. And it's also going to be posted at scng.com/virtual events. And that's where you're going to be able to find all of our past virtual shows, and you're going to be able to see what's coming up next. Now, joining us from her bohemian splendor in Pasadena is our beloved host, writer, and performer, Sandra Singh Low. You've heard her as a regular commentator on NPR's Morning Edition and This American Life and Marketplace. And she's also a contributor to The Atlantic and the author of 7 books, including her most recent, The Mad Woman and the Roomba. And hey, if you're itching to see her live, and why not, check out her zany show, Turkey Hamadina. That's at 3 p.m. Sunday, November 27th, at the Coffee Gallery backstage in Altadena. Sandra.
Hello. Okay, a couple of things. First of all, I'm really delighted that to be seen in a bikini top in live, on the beginning of the book show, but also, oh my gosh, $60 for those 3 events at the Segerstrom Center. Like, that's an incredible value. And it's like, I know, like, Fran Lebowitz alone, if in the last, you might pay $110, to be honest. That's what tickets will go for a Fran Lebowitz event. So people should snap those up, because $60 for 3 events is unheard of.
Yeah, it's really good. And didn't you interviewed Fran Lebowitz in LA last year? Yeah. So it's kind of, and those tickets go for a lot. So this is a fantastic gift that the Segerstrom Center was given. But today's really exciting, because we just happened to have the hottest, most brilliant, most amazing writers who are out now on our show, who all happen to be at the Miami Book Fair either today or tomorrow, and they just happen to be women. All women.
Exactly. Just outstanding in a long male dominated field, literature, and actually Jill's book talks about that, like men in art, a bit.
Let's talk about it for a minute.
Yeah, and they're so extraordinary. So Jill Bialosky, who is, she is a legendary literary figure. I mean, she is a noted novelist, essayist, poetess. She also, that's like her morning job, as she calls it. And then she goes to her day job, which is where she's vice president and executive editor at W.W. Norton, the biggest independent press in America. And also she happened to be my editor who published Mad Woman and the Volvo and Mad Woman and the Roomba. So I can tell you, I do not know when she ever sleeps. So that's Jill.
And then we also have Laura Warrell, and I've known Laura for years. She's a much beloved literary citizen in the LA lit scene and a great, great writing teacher.
And so much buzz on her book right now.
Well, yeah, it was just today, I think it came out that she was named, that her book was named one of the top 10 for Kirkus reviews for this year.
We sucked plenty of it. It's amazing. And then finally, we have our dear friend returning to us, Hanff Korelitz. Unbelievably, she was just here a year and a half ago for a New York Times best-selling novel, The Plot, which was unbelievable, and it's being made into, well, we'll talk about some of the film stuff that's happening, and now she has an amazing, critically acclaimed new novel, The Latecomer, that we're going to talk about today. So it's a lot. Brilliant.
Let's get to it. I'm going to get out of here.
Okay, fantastic. All right. So first up, we have Jill Bialosky. Jill is the critically acclaimed author of 5 collections of poetry, 3 novels, including The Prize, 2 memoirs, Poetry Will Save Your Life, and the New York Times bestselling memoir, History of a Suicide, My Sister's Unfinished Life. Her poems and essays have appeared in The New Yorker, Atlantic Monthly, Harper's, O Magazine, The Kenyon Review, Harvard Review, Paris Review, and Best American Poetry, among others. She co-edited with Helen Schulman the anthology, Wanting a Child. As mentioned, she's an executive editor and vice president at W.W. Norton and Company. Her brilliant new novel, it's so amazing, is The Deceptions. Welcome, Jill, from the East.
Oh, thank you, Sandra. So great to be here.
Yeah, we're so delighted to have you, and thank you for joining us a couple hours late, and we'll get you to bed relatively early. Okay, so I'm going to open with a kind of a bulky question, but
Okay.
I think it needs to set the table for readers who are new to you and new to you as an author, because you're so multidimensional. It has to be, a few compass points need to be laid out. First of all, no less than Salman Rushdie described your book, The Deceptions, as a deeply felt and formally original tour de force. And so sometimes the formally original part can seem, oh, it's brilliant, but kind of maybe cold and abstract, but of course it's not. It's really deeply felt and emotional. The second piece, as we've talked about, is your morning job. You say it's early morning is writing, and then you go to, edit at Norton. So you see every kind of book, and you manage and edit authors as they come through. So you're really highly attuned to the form of books. But the third piece, that your life itself, your autobiography, has been so sort of traumatic and dramatic that no one would blame you if you went to a cottage with chamomile tea or stronger for as many years as you wanted. So the fact that you had this tragedy in your life, and then you work all these different, it's kind of mind-blowing. So that is the end of my setup of my too long question. What if you could talk a little bit, share with your audience a little bit of your youth, some of the family things that happened, and in tandem with how you were developing as a reader, writer, and lover of art.
Well, thank you, Sandra, for that wonderful introduction about The Deceptions. Yeah, I mean, you mentioned earlier that this segment is about with all women writers. Well, I grew up in an all-female household. My father died when I was 2 years old, and I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, and my mother was a widow with 3 young babies. 3 of us are Irish triplets, so we were only 11 months apart. And I was 2, my babies, my younger sister was 1, and my older sister was 3. So I do feel that situation and witnessing sort of the grief that my mother endured and the legacy of her as a single mother in the late 1960s and 70s really informed, I think, very much who I am as a writer and an editor. And, my mother was raised to be a wife and a mother, and suddenly this tragedy happened, and it was very difficult for a woman her age and in her milieu to be able to to fully form her own identity. And I think that that's a big part of why I became a writer and also an editor, and why books were my passage. And my mother did remarry when I was 5 years old. It was a brief marriage, but the best part of the marriage was my youngest sister, who was 10 years younger than me. And I wrote my memoir about her called History of a Suicide, My Sister's Unfinished Life. Because tragically, she ended her life when she was 21. And obviously, that kind of grief and loss has informed my work. And certainly in the Deceptions, my character has gave birth to twins, but the son survived and the daughter did not survive. And so loss and grief have been part of my trajectory. But in this new novel, I was really after fire and anger.
Yes, so let us, if we can talk about that. And I was thinking of the two twins in the womb. It does seem like a Greek myth. It does, there's sort of, it's interesting, and maybe it's just because I've been reading this book, how the ancient classical myths suddenly seem very modern and fresh. And this is certainly a driving thread of the book. So I wonder if you could talk about the genesis of the Deceptions, how the idea and the formation of this book.
Yeah, thank you. So I began this book. My protagonist is a poet, and she's a teacher at a all boys prep school. And when the book opens, her only living son has just departed for college, and her marriage is a little bit precarious. And she is also trying to deal with a crisis that has happened. So the book opens with a sentence, "Something terrible has happened and I don't know what to do." So that's the setup of the book. She's also a poet who is about to publish her third book of poems, which is a book-length poem called The Rape of the Swan. And so that was my setup. And what inspired the setup was that my son did go away to college, and I did experience this awful grief that, some women find it a wonderful time to, go out and, I don't know, go out to dinner more, go on dates. I don't know. Not for me. I was in my bedroom crying for 3 months, but that inspired the novel. And to cope with that, I went to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, which was across town from where I live. And suddenly the Greek and Roman gods asserted themselves in the Greek and Roman galleries of the museum. And so I began to realize that what I really wanted to write about was the way in which women have been up against the patriarchy for eternity, as far as I'm concerned. And so my character, I really wanted to, she hasn't quite found her agency at the beginning of the book. And that was one of the questions that the novel poses is, how does a woman who's a poet, she's a teacher, she's a mother, she's a wife, how do we even do that, number one? And how do we get the kind of recognition that we might deserve, where for male poets, and there is a male poet in my book, it's an entitlement and a privilege. And so these are some of the questions that I was exploring in the book.
And really a central myth and a central image is Leda and the Swan. And I think that there's both references to, of course, the amazing poem by W.B. Yeats, who Camille Paglia said was the most important poem of the 20th century, whatever. But it's an amazing poem, and then all the different variations of art that is on it. So how did that come, the Leda and the Swan? Was it walking through the museum that came? How did that come to you to be so central?
I seriously can't even remember, but I think that I I definitely had this idea that that my protagonist was working on this book, and this visiting poet that comes to her school for a year becomes overly interested in the book that she's writing called The Rape of the Swan. And then I realized, of course, about, I connected that with Leda and the Swan, and that poem has always kind of haunted me because there is a violation in the poem, a rape, but there are two ways of reading the poem. One can be that that Leda was enjoying the seduction, and another way of reading it was that she was not enjoying the seduction and saw it as a violation, and that her knowledge, she came to her own knowledge after this terrible assault. And that was something that I was interested in exploring in my novel, and the way in which, well, there are two things that happen. I also raise issues of accountability, and also about literary appropriation. I don't want to give too much of the novel away, but certainly this visiting poet asserts his power, and that was one of the driving forces of the book, I guess, for me, was really looking at the way in which, as a woman, the patriarchy has informed my own life as a writer and as a woman, and I wanted to challenge some of those ideas.
And I think with the lead of this one, it's so interesting to look at all the art. So I think one thing that's fascinating is, as the unnamed narrator is wandering through the museum, you see these different pieces of art, and those are in the book. And I found that so interesting to see the different representations of Leda and the Swan. Yeah, sometimes she seems to be enjoying it. There's one where she's caressing herself and nursing the Swan. I mean, it's wild how many different artistic, often by men, depictions are of this. So one starts to wonder, and I just found myself in reading it again, all these, and Hercules is a huge image that comes up, Medusa, and playing with these different roles. I mean, did you find that once you seized on that, it became so rich? Because it really felt like that.
Yes, I did. I was so excited by it. I began, when I was working on the novel, I began going to the museum, and I brought my iPad with me, and I started taking pictures of some of the photos that are in the book. And I really began to make these connections between what my protagonist was going through and, some of these myths. And of course, the gods are always seizing upon and shape-shifting in order to get their desires realized. And certainly Leda and other figures in the Greek and Roman mythology are not always happy about it.
And also that, and it's so interesting to read and think about, of like Medusa, one of the Gorgons, wasn't her fault that she got hit on, but she was the one that was punished. Right? And so how they go through and, the desire was too much, couldn't help myself, said Zeus or whatever, and then it's the woman who's punished. And it really does make you start to think, and of course the resonances to today, it's kind of like, obviously there's kind of a Me Too resonance between some of it, but it feels not like newsy of this time. It feels like you are just seeing all of history and the millennia come to life, which is.
Oh, thank you, Sandra. Well, it's true that when I was working on the book, at a certain point, the Me Too movement did explode. And I think it only just fueled my anger further. And as a writer, I think this was the first time I really thought about how anger and rage could help to create a vital voice for my protagonist. And I just decided to go with that.
Yeah, no, it's, oh my gosh, it's so fascinating. And it's a fantastic book. And I think, and I want to say the voice that it starts in has a certain clip. And then it just, for me, picked up speed, like in the last 100, it's like it's just a fantastic read. It's both a literary read, it's a beautiful read, it's compelling, and it's, you can't put it down. So, okay. So I wish we could talk longer and look at the photos, but we have to move on. So thank you, and have a great time tomorrow at the Miami Book Fair.
Thank you, Sandra. I really appreciate being on your show.
A huge pleasure. And thank you, Jill Bialosky. Her newest amazing novel is The Deceptions, and everyone get it now. All right. So next up, we go to our second author. There she is on screen, Laura Warrell, The 30-Second Download. Laura Warrell is a contributor to the Bread Loaf Writers Conference and the Tin House Summer Workshop, and is a graduate of the Creative Writing Program at Vermont College of Fine Arts. Her work has appeared in the HuffPost, The Rumpus, and LA or Los Angeles Review of Books, or LARB, among other publications. She's taught creative writing and literature at the Berklee College of Music in Boston. Take note of that, that will become relevant in a moment. And through the Emerging Voices Fellowship at PEN America in Los Angeles, where she lives. Her amazing new book, as you see, is Sweet, Soft, Plenty Rhythm. And since all of our authors are at the Miami Book Fair this week, I talked to her just 2 days ago. So we can roll that tape now. Laura, welcome to Bookish. We're so psyched to have you on the show today. Welcome.
Thank you. I am thrilled to be here. Really excited to talk to you. I'm a fan. Yeah. So thanks so much for having me.
Oh, that's so sweet. There's so much buzz on this book, so much acclaim. Sweet, soft, plenty rhythm. So I wonder, for readers who are new to the book, if you could just set it up for us. First of all, the title.
Sure.
That, and then the story, if you can.
Sounds good. So the title, Sweet, Soft, Plenty Rhythm, comes from a quote from jazz musician Jelly Roll Morton, who said, "Jazz should be played sweet, soft, plenty rhythm." And the book itself follows a jazz musician. He's a trumpet player, a little bit of a ladies' man, a womanizer, depending on your, I guess I'm learning your generation. You might have a different word for him. He's a Lothario, etc. And in the very first chapter of the book, he learns that the woman who is closest to his heart is pregnant, and he leaves her, doesn't want to face that responsibility. And over the course of the book, he connects or reconnects with other women who are already in his life, new women, to try to, as I said, ignore that very big problem he now has and to connect with these different women. But then the camera shifts. We turn the tables and the focus is on the women. So each chapter is told from a different woman's perspective as he's kind of walking in and out of her life. So the idea is what's happening in her world, what problems, issues, concerns does she have as he's kind of coming and going, and how does that relationship feel from her perspective? So we meet some women who he's been with before. We meet women that he picks up. For instance, there's a woman who works at a bar that he meets, but then we have the sort of primary women in his life. He's got a 14-year-old daughter. Her name is Coco, who is struggling with figuring out who she is, how she's going to be a woman in the world when she's got him as a father. And then we've got his ex-wife, Pia, who is still carrying a torch. So the idea here is, what's he going to do, right, about this pregnancy? And what are the women going to do? Are they going to stay in this relationship where they're not really getting what they want? Or are they going to move on? Are they going to try to shift the dynamics? So that's what it's about.
Yeah, and I think that it's kind of like a Don Juan is another Lothario type. Yep. It's kind of a flip over of that story. Instead of it all being from Don Juan's point of view, it's all of these women, which makes a great read. And I think that you've said, like you said, letting the cat out of the bag. You were writing this at this particular time when you were working out something yourself, right? For
sure. And, you know, I think that this is a question that comes up, I think, obviously for all writers, but especially with this book, this is one question that I've gotten. And so I've had to tell people, I've had to admit that I myself was involved with a musician, and I was hoping for more of a relationship than I was getting. And I was also feeling like, wow, he's not always nice to me. He's not really seeing who I am. He's not recognizing. I mean, I'm a writer. He's a musician. We're in the same boat. Does he think when he leaves and goes back into his life that I'm just sitting here pining away? No, I've got emotions around what's happening in our relationship. And I also have, as I said, my own set of concerns and insecurities and goals and frustrations. And I wanted to reflect that in a book. I feel like so many of these stories, I mean, we could just list the names, Lothario, Casanova, Don Juan, etc. We've told
Anna Karenina, who
exactly.
It doesn't work out well for the, that's
exactly. There are so many stories about that kind of character because he's so compelling, because so many women have been involved with someone like him. But very often the focus of those stories is him, how he came to be, what wound, right, he might be trying to overcome, and how he's navigating those relationships. And the women often are one-dimensional, or at the very least, their stories don't really carry much weight. And I wanted to shift that perspective because it's a really intense relationship to be involved in. And I think that we don't think as much about how women operate in relationships with men. We sort of default to the male's needs and desires and nature, and women are expected to sort of shape themselves and their desires and needs around that. And I wanted to say, well, that's not necessarily fair, but also let's see what's happening when he leaves the room.
Yeah, and it's a wonderful read. The way that you the rhythm of the characters, the rhythm of the stories, it just seems very coherent and seamless, even though there are about 10 different women that you find along the way. And I think that you have said some women more difficult to write than others. And I think it's fascinating, but your male character, Circus, you said was easy for you to write.
Yes. And I'm not really sure why. I've been talking about this book now for a couple of months and I still don't know why. So we have, for instance, we have his ex-wife, Pia. She is sort of fragile. She's really devoted her life to him. And now she's at a point where she doesn't know if she can take it anymore. We've got his 14-year-old daughter, as I said, who's sort of struggling with who she is. We have Maggie, who is the woman who's pregnant. She's this incredibly dynamic, confident, very unconflicted drummer. And they were all, it took me some time to get into their characters and hear their voices and know what they were going to do next. But for some reason, I really got Circus almost immediately. I don't even really remember a period. I know all writers, I'm sure you do too, right? We have those tools when we're trying to figure out our characters. And I can remember what I did for all of the women to try to figure out who they were. But I don't remember having to do that for him. I don't know whether it's, unfortunately, having way too much experience with men like that. And I don't mean in my own romantic life, but I've known a lot of musicians. I've known a lot of men. For some reason, I've been friends with a lot of men who are hard to pin down. And so I sort of get that character. I get that motivation in a lot of ways. I hear that voice. And I think especially because he's a jazz musician, it was easier to find him for some reason. There was something musical about him, and there's something in the music to find him in. So he came a lot easier. And I'm very affectionate. I have a lot of affection toward him, even though he's a cad.
Yeah, but by the end, the arc of the book, it's so moving. The themes of love, what it's like to be loved, what it's like to give love, and that's why I just love the book because and the way that you've played with the genders and sexes. So often the big important books are about war and men and whatever, and this is totally about the heart. Now, and two questions come up for me. One is, I wonder if for you personally, you're a writer. And there was a musician. If, to a certain extent, artists have to be selfish to get their work done or to protect their art. I mean, where do you land, Laura, on this?
It's funny. I think I've had this conversation a lot. I think there's even a moment in the book where Circus is, he's a teacher. He teaches at the Berklee College of Music in Boston. The book takes place there. And he's talking to one of his students who he thinks he has a better relation, like a mentor relationship with, and that student's not as into him. And I, if I'm remembering correctly, Circus says something to him and the kid says, oh, do I have to be selfish or crazy or whatever it is? And I think that there is that in order to succeed. And I think there is that expectation. And I think in a way, we have to be protective. Maybe I won't use the word selfish, protective of the time and the space. I know I'm very territorial around, the time that I have because it's so precious and rare at times. I'm very protective of that time to write. And I become very, I guess there is a little protection. I just keep wanting to say, but let's say selfish. Yeah, being selfish about your work, because it's so hard to find the time and space to do it. It's so hard to navigate whatever industry you're trying to be a part of. And then once you have a book, a painting, a song, an album in the world, I'm finding, wow, there's so much else to navigate. And you really do sort of have to protect your heart, right? You have to protect your ego, and you have to, protect the work so it stays true to you and whatever it is you get from it. I remember talking to somebody who was trying to rush through a novel that they were writing. And I said, this is the only thing that you have for free that gives you pleasure and joy and a sense of purpose. So just sit and enjoy it. Don't rush through and feel like you need to have a certain number of words by the end of the month, right? Just do the work and enjoy it. And so, I think that Circus is selfish, and maybe this is the tie-in, right? He is protecting that time. He is feeling like the most important thing I have to do on this planet is my work as an artist, and love, connection, family, that's going to have to take a back seat until I get where I'm trying to get. And unfortunately, he's not there yet when we meet him in the book, and he feels like this is his last chance. So when Maggie tells him she's pregnant, he says, no, thanks.
Yeah, his 40th birthday. So
Yes.
Big life moment. Oh, this
Right.
can go this way or that way. And that way that you do build in some compassion for in a very deft way. I think that you're a brilliant writer and also a writing teacher. So if we can talk about craft for the last few minutes, which has flown by. And I think that you can talk the detail of each character. You've talked about shaping these characters, and that each has, and there's a Spotify song list I know out about it. Each has a kind of music they listen to and a beverage they drink. Can you talk more about that process?
Sure. I do teach writing, and to me, story really comes alive and grips readers or watchers, right? If you're talking about television and film, with the details. Somebody who drinks a glass of Chardonnay, and I'm not talking about stereotype, especially, right now when we have so much sort of discussion of like, oh, women who drink white wine. I'm not suggesting that, but for sure, somebody who drinks whiskey versus white wine versus a cocktail, that's a different person. And so trying to figure out what specifically my character drinks, what he listens to, does she like to take trips to Paris, or does she like to be in a cabin in the woods? These are the types of things that, for me as their writer, helped me figure out who they were, how they sound, what their personalities were like. And I think as a writer, the advice that I often gave to my students is get into the nitty-gritty with your characters and figure out some of these details, because they might show up in the book in a way that's really going to make that character come alive and make the reader really feel like, I am here. I can smell this bar, right? I can see the person in the corner, drinking whatever it is that they're drinking. I'm there, I'm experiencing it. It's the difference between, distance and really feeling like you're there. And as I said, those are the types of things where, when I was lost, I sort of thought, and this is silly, I make this joke, but it means something to me. Does this person prefer Beyonce over Rihanna? Stuff like that feels, the whole Beatles versus Rolling Stones, those types of discussions really start shaping and fleshing out those characters, because in them is the meat. Well, why do they prefer the Rolling Stones? What is it about those songs or that spirit that is present in that character? And then how do I connect them to some of the other things? All right, he likes the Rolling Stones, and he likes Wild Turkey, and he, this is his type of woman, right? There's a lot in there, and it makes it fun. That's part of the fun of, for me, writing, is figuring out who these people are.
I'd never seen a thermos of vodka tonic, right? So that's, and women within the tribe, and I had never heard of that, and that was so specific and so interesting. And I think that you've also talked, about in advice that you've given, and to me it connects with the way that your ear works, where you gave a tip for writer's block that was interesting, that you weren't blocked in this, but you've given advice about how to get out of it. Could you?
Yes, sure. And speaking of the thermos, the thermos of vodka, and talking about details, what a moment like that I think does is it tells you everything you need to know without me telling you, right? What she's drinking, the fact that she has it in a thermos, right, tells you what her relationship is to alcohol, right? Or at least what her relationship is to alcohol that day. Right. And without me having to explicitly tell you. And that's why I think details are so rich and important. So I forget which thing I said for about writer's block, but one thing that's coming to mind, and I'll probably remember, one thing that I do when I'm stuck very often, because I know I'm stuck with, I just remembered. Okay. So one thing I do when I'm stuck is, I write myself a letter from my characters. In fact, I just did that. I was stuck with one of my characters in the new book, and I realized I don't know who she is. I don't know how she sounds. I don't know her. So I wrote, "Hello, Laura." And then even then I had to stop. Would she say, "Hi, Laura"? Would she say, "Hello, Laura"? Would she say greetings? How would she greet me? And so when I wrote that letter in her voice, by the time I got to the end of it was about 15 pages long, I knew her. And I started with having her just tell me about herself. "Oh, I grew up here. I did this. Oh, that was a fun day." It's just sort of stream of consciousness, and I'm finding out all kinds of things about her. So that's one tool. And then something else I do is I just pick a book off of the shelf. And very often it's poetry, because I feel like I get into the books either through language or character. And so I pick a book off the shelf and I just kind of read and I look for lines. And then there's always a line that I gravitate toward that's somehow, and I'm not choosing it, I just feel it, right? That's somehow connected to the scene or the moment, and it helps me get in. And sometimes I put that line into my manuscript, into the document, so that I can go from there and then obviously take it out. But that's one way that I get through. And I think a lot of people, when they're struggling with writer's block, just sort of sit and allow themselves to be blocked rather than or try to chip away at it or do something else. And to me, it's, finding a way back in, either through character, right? Doing some exercise to figure out who they are, or the language itself, the text itself. And so those are the two things that I do to get back in.
That is so inspiring. I've never heard of that, the letter technique in particular. It's really, really interesting. Well, everybody should get your book. It's Sweet, Soft, Plenty Rhythm. It's really, it's getting so much acclaim and raves across the board, and it's a fantastic read. So thank you so much, Laura, for being on Bookish, and hopefully we'll see you soon.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure to talk to you, and hopefully see you soon. Thanks.
Amazing. And now finally we have Hanff Korelitz, the 30-second download. Korelitz's novels include The Plot, adaptation forthcoming from Hulu, starring Mahershala Ali. You Should Have Known, adapted for HBO as The Undoing, directed by David E. Kelly, starring Nicole Kidman and a guy called Hugh Grant. Admission, 2013 film, same name, Tina Fey, Lily Tomlin, Paul Rudd, The Devil and Webster, The White Rose, The Sabbath Day River, and a jury of her peers. With her husband, Irish poet Paul Muldoon, she adapted James Joyce's The Dead as an immersive theatrical event at New York's Irish Repertory Theater. And she's also the founder of Book the Writer, a New York City-based service that offers pop-up book groups, both in her living room and virtually and across the country. Her new novel is The Latecomer, and it's mind-blowing, and we're always delighted to have her on. She's at the Miami Book Festival, so we tape this morning. So here we go, roll tape. Jean, thanks so much for joining us from the Miami Book Fair, right?
That's right. Or book fair adjacent. I've been in Miami for a few days already, but the book fair, I believe, well, it's already started, but my part starts tonight.
Great. So, and you're in a hotel. So if somebody knocks on the door and says, author, ready to go, it will be completely on par for what we're doing. Okay. So I'm so thrilled. I mean, that we had you on just 18 months ago, when the plot was coming out.
Doing out with a new novel already. That doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't. So I wonder if, and it's such a great origin story between the plot, which, as we know, insane, ragey bestseller, Jimmy Fallon's summer book read. I mean, it really, you're a literary writer, but you're phenomenal on a bestseller, popular pop culture level as well.
Thank you for calling me a literary writer. That means everything to me. I feel I've been sullied over the years because I love plot so much, and that does not sit well with a lot of the guardians of the literary, tea room. So sometimes I feel a little bit shunned, but at heart, I am, of course, a literary writer.
Well, we're going to go back to that in a moment. And I think particularly in The Latecomer, there's such an interweaving of character and story and plot points, but we're going to get back to that in a moment. But for readers who are new to this, if you could tell the twin origin stories, if you will, of The Latecomer and the plot, because it's pretty fantastic. Right.
Well, it's sort of a story of how The Latecomer became a meta illustration of its own name. Which is not at all intentional. I certainly was not trying to make this book late for anything, but I had been working on the novel for a couple of years, and it had been turned down by my last publisher, and I believe the words that made their way back to me via my agent were not even close. So that was encouraging.
So, but can you tell a little bit about the origin of like how you started working on this book and what intrigued you at the beginning?
What intrigued me was the idea of a family in which the children are born. In this case, they're triplets. They're in vitro triplets. So obviously they're all born at the same time. But there is a leftover embryo, as there often is. And this embryo has been cooling its heels and every other part of it in whatever chemical they use to deep freeze embryos for almost a generation. Sorry, can you hear that?
Yes.
No.
We can hear you. There's something vague for a moment, but not bad.
All right. It's my daughter saying, should I come back to the room now?
Life of an author on book tour.
All right. So let me just respond to this, and then I'm going to go back and sorry.
It's exciting. Like we're there with you in Miami. Like,
yes, it's so exciting. Right. So I had gotten interested in this idea of a family which is so spread out that the members of technically the same generation are basically growing up not only in a different family, but in a different generation of the family. So in this case, I had these 3 triplets, and there's this leftover embryo. And when the triplets are about to leave home to go to college, the parents decide for some unfathomable reason to have that last child. And my question was, what has to be happening in this family for that to seem like a good idea, because it's certainly, I would say that to any parent out there, the last thing we're thinking when our last child leaves home is, oh, I know what to do. I have an idea. Let's have a baby and start all over again. So, that was the first question. The second question was, what is it going to be like for that kid when they understand the randomness of their being left behind for an entire generation, actually missing members of their family, which, in this case is what's happened. And, how do you, that is such a kind of mind exploding thing. How do you make sense of it? And in the broader question of the family, what is the obligation of that child to the family, which in this case is a family in disarray? And what does this child owe to the parents, the siblings, and themselves?
And I think that it's a family story. You do it so well that the internal dynamics of the three triplets their voices are so clear, and why they're different from each other is so clear, and why they can't stand each other is kind of makes some plot also. So the plot, especially between the brother and sister at the same college, their characters make plot, but also the background of the story, because it takes place where even technology has changed so quickly from the first set to the second. And it's a very distinctly interesting family as well, if you can set that up. There's some
this is a family that, as you know, as most writers know, when you begin a book like a novel, you don't know who these people are. You don't know why they're important enough to be in your novel. You don't know what they look like, what they sound like, what they care about. So you're kind of making decisions at the beginning that may be setting you up for a lot of heartbreak later when you realize that they shouldn't have been front and center in your book to begin with. But at least you're going to be in bed with these decisions for a long time. And one of those decisions that I made was to make this family, their name is Oppenheimer, the descendants of a real person. And this was a person who lived in 18th century Stuttgart, Germany. And he is a kind of infamous Jewish martyr in that he was tried and executed in the 18th century for murdering his boss, the Duke, who he worked for. And the funny thing is, all you have to do is look at a picture of the boss, who looked just like Henry VIII. He was a deeply unhealthy man, and he dropped dead one day. And, nobody needed to murder him. He was doing a great job on his own just by being a total glutton. And, but this man, Joseph Oppenheimer, who was nicknamed Yud Zeus, was nonetheless tried and executed. And 200 years after that, he was sort of re-victimized by the Nazis, who made a propaganda film about him called Yud Zeus. So in real life, Joseph Oppenheimer had no descendants, but through the magic of fiction, I made this family his descendants, and they are a German Jewish family who've been in America since the mid 19th century, and they have succeeded. They're very wealthy. They have a family-owned financial firm, and all of the touchstones of the German Jewish aristocracy in America are theirs. They go to those camps, they go to those schools, they live in that house. And they're entitled. They're very wealthy, and
there's the walk, the Christmas Day walk across the bridge to get Chinese food, and the nutcracker, and the richness of Johanna, the mother, just the richness of the detail of this time. That anybody who has either grown up in this time, no matter what family, there's some touchstones that are so engrossing about it. And I think the art. There's such an interesting vein of art that goes through it, and the patriarch of the family, how he collects art. It is just a fascinating read. But to go back in your writer's process to track this, so now we know, and it's been outstandingly rave reviewed, and it's really a masterwork. But let us take it. We know the success. It's so helpful for people to see when writers get stuck sometimes, that it's not always easy. So if you could go back, what did you feel was not working in that?
Was it not even close? Right. So after it was turned down by my former publisher, I submitted it to my editor who had left and was at a different publisher, and she also turned it down, but she didn't say not even close. She said, it's just not working. You need to write it again. And I wrote it again for over several months, and then she turned it down again. Basically, we were in the exact same place. It had not progressed. I had just moved the pieces around. And it was in the middle of the kind of postmortem of this second rejection, or my third rejection of the book, that I've found myself kind of out of desperation, sort of pitching her a novel that I was pretty much making up on the spot. It was about this failed writer who has this horrible student, and the student has this brilliant idea. And then the student dies, and the teacher says, the failed writer says, I'm going to take that story and write my own novel. This is not a story about plagiarism. He doesn't take a single word. It is about the adaptation of a story, just like Jane Smiley adapted King Lear for 1,000 Acres and ad nauseum, as many examples as you want. I can probably throw at you. But he still feels embarrassed about it. He doesn't want anybody to know. You know, we do live in an age where all somebody has to say is, I accuse you, and career over. So he knows that, and he doesn't want anyone to know. So the mayhem that ensues when he is found out, and he has to sort of figure out who is accusing him, who has this information. So I'm just telling my editor this story, and she's sort of getting more and more excited. And the next day, she absolutely stunned me by buying both books, the one I hadn't been able to sell her, and this one that barely existed. I mean, that I had made up in her office. And it was her idea that I put aside The Latecomer, which I clearly was just, I painted myself into a corner. I had no more ideas. I was exhausted with it. And she said, why don't you write that other book you were telling me about? And that is what I did. And in great contrast to The Latecomer, it just came pouring out. It was written in 4 months, which is absurd. And after that was over, this kind of never before experienced period of writing, I picked up The Latecomer again, and I saw it. I understood where I had gone wrong and how to fix it. And it was just an incredible, I know, that's just what the
okay, well, let's break this down for a moment. So The Latecomer, and certainly I think that we've talked about this a little bit, even the experience of being a writer who is at that moment in their career, you're sitting with a book, no one's buying it, and that really infuses the plot with about this writer, that we can all, as writers, laugh at this guy, but also sympathize. And it's for writers. But when you looked at it, let's break down that moment. When you go back to The Latecomer and you see, what did you see, Jean?
Okay, so what I saw was that in all of my attention to the outsized number of protagonists in The Latecomer, and there are 6, which is 5 more than is usual for me. I had been so concerned with not making anybody's story more important than anybody else, and giving them all interesting things to do and differentiating them from one another, that I had not paused to think about whose story this was, and who was telling it. I mean, those are 2 related ideas, but I had not understood that even though there were all these protagonists, and even though they are very important, there had to be one through line and one perspective and one person. And I saw that, I knew who it was, and I began to rewrite the novel with that in mind and with that voice in mind. And the voice is a particularly challenging thing in this book because we don't reveal the narrator till quite a ways in, and that is a challenge. It was a real challenge for the narrator too, when she did the audiobook.
No, and that's what makes it amazing. Even from the very first page and the very first paragraph, there's something about that voice that is so wry but thoughtful. It really is completely magical and really weaves the book entirely together. I mean, I think it is I think it's a masterwork. And because it spans this family and this history in such a way, and then it lends us down to the detail of every single person it's so moving, and it's also hilarious. So
That I would say that was my hope, but it was beyond my hope. I mean, I didn't dream of that.
Completely succeed. So anyway, if people haven't gotten it yet, they should get it. The latecomer just out a few months ago, and congratulations, you're the great, not just the great dame of American letters, I mean the great writer. I think this is a spectacular achievement. Congratulations.
It's been a very sweet late career development. I certainly dreamed of this kind of response to books number 1 through 7. And I'm very, very thrilled with it and very grateful for it. I'm not just hashtag grateful, I'm really grateful.
And on that note, thank you so much, Jean. It's always great to talk to you. We look forward to the next time. Right. Brilliant. You take it, Samantha, to you. Love it.
Fabulous. My gosh,
Amazing.
What an evening. Thanks again, Sandra. And thanks, Jill and Laura and Jean. And thanks to our production manager, always the Oz behind the curtain, Julie Corlett. Don't forget, copies of the books by tonight's authors are available at Once Upon a Time bookstore. We're going to be back next month, but you don't have to wait that long for great content on authors. Books editor Eric Peterson can tell us more about the great book coverage we've got coming up in the newspapers. Hey, Eric, are you there?
I am covered in blue light. You guys have much better lighting than me, and I need better. This week, I will just say, check out, Sandra was very nice to give a shout out to the book pages. Try that out this week. We've got Jason Guriel, who wrote a book called On Browsing, and it will just make you wistful for wandering through bookstores, checking out what's there, or flipping through, looking for vinyl back when we called them records. It's really great. Also, Lisa Ballantyne gives a look at the books that scare her and that she doesn't want to read. So check that out. Thanks, everybody.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Really do check it out, everybody. And if you'd like to share your thoughts from today, or you have suggestions, or you just have additional questions, please email us at events@scng.com. And once again, thanks to the Segerstrom Center for the Arts for sponsoring tonight's program. Take care, everybody. Have a great Thanksgiving. And I'm personally grateful to all of you. Bye.